All right, we're back live. The Senate Health and Welfare, Friday, February 16th. We're going to look very briefly. I don't see Karen Barber up there. She is. Are you up there?
Hi.
There you are. Karen, you have sent us some language and I'm wondering if you can put it up on screen for us. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the language. Then we're gonna move on, but we just would like for you to walk through the language with us very briefly, please.
What's the?
192. This is on the.
Soon to be version 7.1.
Yeah, because after we finish this, we have some testimony from the Department of Health on 197.
You want me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, yes, we don't use Zoom a lot, so let me figure this out.
Well, and if we have difficulty doing that, we can move along and come back. So why don't we do that? And then we have your language, but we wanted to have you go through it with us because it's yours. Oh, here she is. We can't.
Can you see this?
It needs to be magnified.
Okay. Why can't I?
We
We use Teams, I'm sorry. Can you see this?
Keep going, keep one more. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so essentially what it does is it takes out the language on the panel and it substitutes this language instead. So, and this isn't, as I explained to Katie, this isn't, so I apologize, it's not like a clean edit. What I was trying to do was just highlight the big changes so it would be easier to see. But essentially what it's doing is saying once a report concerning competency or sanity is completed or disclosed, the relevant potential custodial commissioner shall determine whether placement of the person who is the subject of the report is appropriate at a forensic facility. So it adds in to consider placement. And then it makes clear that a party to the hearing has a right to ask the AHS if placement at a forensic facility is being considered, and if not, to ask the court that we do consider it. Because I think there's mostly, it appears in this committee to be more of a concern on the person, whether or not they should be placed in the facility. But I think there's also kind of the public safety component. We've heard from the state's attorneys saying they may want them in there. So I wanted to leave in the same path to allow the court to essentially order us to consider it. So that's still there. And that language is the same, but instead of the panel, it's the commissioner. And then the criteria that the panel would be considering, that ultimately really the commissioner is considering, is now put in here, and it's really clear that it's something that custodial commissioner shall consider. So it's the same clinical and risk factor, dangerousness factors. I can't remember if you changed that or not. I pulled from the current version. I couldn't remember where that stood.
It didn't change it.
Okay, so it's the same factor. So all of that is just plugged into here, and it makes it clear that the custodial commissioner has to consider all of that stuff.
Okay, so
then it adds,
go keep going.
Okay, then it adds two other things that the relevant potential custodial commissioner, because again, it could be DMH or Dale, shall consult with the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services and all other relevant commissioners as necessary. So even though it's already happening, this is making it clear that it's a must. It shall happen. And then the other part was, should a determination be that placement at a forensic facility is appropriate, the relevant potential custodial commissioner shall notify the mental health care ombudsman or blank so that they may consult with the individual's attorney. I left this blank because I think, as I noted earlier, from DMH it's clear it's the ombudsman. I was a little less clear if it should be the ombudsman for Dale or if it should be the Disability Rights Council, like who should get that notice. But those are the provisions, and that was our suggested language.
Okay,
It's
so.
clunky, but
Right, so yeah, it's a recommendation. We do now have it on our webpage. And, if there are questions of understanding here, let's entertain those, but then I do want to move on to 197 because we have witnesses waiting. And also 187. So any questions? We'll come back to this on Tuesday, with Katie. And we'll go through the whole bill. So at that point, perhaps we could have looked at this and then thought through what our individual thoughts are on the panel and this proposal. So questions for Karen of sort of understanding what's here. Okay, we're good. Thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Sure.
So outside.
Can I just make, thanks, Karen.
Yeah.
Can we just make, on Tuesday, when we hear from,
We have the legal aid.
yeah, just have them look at both the.
It's right on
bill
the
and
bill.
this, to make sure.
I'll bet you $10 or I won't, maybe I shouldn't do that.
I don't know. But
Yeah, so they'll look, we'll make sure they see that. Thank you very much, Karen. You've been more than helpful. And we really appreciate it. And also Stuart, who has been our two floating support service members.
anytime.
All right.
they're
thank you.
always here.
A pleasure.
Have a good weekend, you guys.
Well,
Thanks, same to you.
too. Bye.
yeah. All right, so Katie, we're gonna, well, not Katie, but Katie's here for S-197, and we asked Sarah Owen to come in as our state toxicologist to give us some information about the definition that's in the bill on PFAS. So Sarah, welcome. Are you there?
I think I'm here.
We can hear you. Yes, you're here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. So I was here, I was with you all last week, and we did talk a bit about the definition. Health has been working with our colleagues at the Department of Environmental Conservation and the Agency of Agriculture, and we have come up with a definition that we think is avoids some of the complications of the simple fully fluorinated carbon atom. Do you want me to read you the language or just explain it more colloquially?
Can you put it up on your screen? Because we don't have it in front of us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think. Sorry, it's hard for me to find the right window. So I'm going to share. Do I have the option to share?
Yeah, Kiki gave it to you. You're all set.
Oh, I see it now. Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't use Zoom. So
Oh, we don't use Teams, so there we have it.
am I sharing?
Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Okay, so you see
It's-
words.
Yes, it's well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this has been a working definition. Like I said, we've been working with DEC and Ag, and this is where we are right now. So adding on to what has already been provided, the fully fluorinated carbon compound, we've added the federal TSCA definition, which is a way to narrow that fully fluorinated carbon down to somewhere around 11,000 chemicals. It is important to note that that TSCA definition does still include a few compounds used in medicine and a few compounds that are pesticide active ingredients. So our suggestion is that chemicals could be removed from that list, depending on what sort of regulation comes into place for PFAS. Chemicals could be removed if they are federally regulated and not persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. Those are characteristics of chemicals that are defined by authoritative agencies. And on the flip side, if there are chemicals that are PFAS that have been left off of this list, that they could be added. So it sort of accounts for, making sure that we're getting all the right PFAS.
Okay. So why don't you read the definition to us, even though we can see it? It's helpful always to hear it and have your comments afterwards.
Okay. Definition: perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, means one fully fluorinated carbon compound that is identified as PFAS as defined in 40 CFR 705.3. The commissioner may exempt chemicals from the definition of PFAS if that chemical is federally regulated and not considered persistent, bioaccumulative, or toxic. The commissioner may add chemicals to the definition of PFAS if that chemical is persistent, bioaccumulative, or toxic.
Okay, so do you have a link with 40 CFR 705.3, 705.3? We can look it up. If you have a link to that rule, that would be helpful.
Yes, I can definitely send you the link to that.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Do you have a question? Did you want to?
Concerns I can raise later.
Okay, all right. Questions for Dr. Owen? Okay, so this is a suggestion, and we are looking at 197 next week, and we'll have further testimony on this, but we appreciate your coming in today to offer this. And it's on our webpage now, so we have a place to go and reference that recommendation.
Okay.
Thank you. So the 11,000 chemicals that are included within the federal TSCA definition.
It's roughly 11,000. It looks like it's 11,409.
Okay, so what's left out of that definition?
What's left out would be chemicals that have a simple functional group of a fully fluorinated carbon.
Mm-hmm.
So we often hear people talk about the strength of the fully fluorinated carbon. The CF bond is certainly a very strong bond, and that's why PFAS can be very persistent in our environment. But some chemicals have a carbon with 1, 2, or 3 fluorines, which can be fully fluorinated, and that imparts a different it imparts functionality to that chemical. So it makes the chemical what it is. So for example, Prozac, there's a medicine that lowers our blood pressure that has a fully fluorinated carbon. So as we think of chemicals from the organic chemistry perspective, functional groups are always added to make chemicals do specific things, to bind specific targets, to stay in our bodies for the right time. So this definition narrows down and leaves out a lot of those medicines, pesticides, other chemicals in our world that we really don't, like, scientists don't consider PFAS.
And that if it's a pesticide, that they're not bioaccumulative and persistent? Are there any included in that? So any exclusions in that definition that are pesticides that would be bioaccumulative and persistent?
Probably not. So the 4 active ingredients that are included in this definition have already gone through the EPA review. EPA does a very detailed job of looking at persistence, looking at toxicity. They have lots of science on human health effects and how toxic the chemical can be towards people. So one of the pesticides that's included is tetraconazole, which is approved for use on the fungus that causes athlete's foot, for example. So that's one of them. So these are
Okay.
chemicals that are in use.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll sort through this. Our, all the expertise and chemistry around the table will take us some time, no problem. But we appreciate your weighing in on the topic.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you. Is there anyone else I know that Brendan Atwood is here and I saw Ilse Stahlberg. Was she? Brendan, welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair. How are you?
Ilse, are you here? Were you testifying on a 187 or 197?
On 187.
Oh, good. All right, so we're gonna move away from 197. I just wanted to capture that definition from Sarah, so we have something to look at as we hear further testimony. And then we're looking at it's actually a new bill. Katie hasn't walked through it with us yet. Do you want to walk through it with us first, Katie, please?
Sure.
And Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes, please. Go ahead.
just want to say
For
the
the record.
department
For
is.
the record.
Thank
for the
you.
record.
Thank you. The reminder for the record, Brendan Atwood, Policy Director with the Health Department. We are prepared to offer some additional comments on sections 1 and 2 of the PFAS bill if it would be helpful, but we're also happy to reserve those for next week.
Let's do that. Well, because we're gonna get our heads right into 197 a little bit next week, so that'd be helpful. And I think we're doing that on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, before we go to 192.
Okay. Great. Well, I'll try to make them brief because I do look forward to having sunscreen bill introduced and walk through. So first, thank you for inviting me to be here today.
Okay, so Brendan, before we turn to you, we have not looked at the bill, and we're gonna have Ledge Council walk through the bill with us. And then we're gonna turn to you, from your perspective.
Got it. So we're going to the sunscreen bill and not PFAS today.
Yes.
Understood.
You have it. You have it. And,
Pardon?
Kiki is gonna reach out on 197 for Tuesday. See you on Tuesday. Okay,
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no. It's just our time. Go ahead.
Good morning again.
Okay.
Kate McKenna with the Legislative Council. So we're looking at S-187. This is a bill that pertains to sunscreen and child restraint systems. The portion pertaining to child restraint systems has been looked at by our colleagues in Senate Transportation. So this morning, we're only looking at the sunscreen language. So this adds a new section in Title 16. This committee doesn't work in Title 16 often, although you have 3 members who spend a lot of time there. And basically what this does is it authorizes the use of sunscreen and application of sunscreen at school without treating it as a medicine, for example, that needs a special doctor's note to put sunscreen on at school. So the language itself, in subsection A, pursuant to the requirements of this section, each public and approved independent school in the state is to permit students with a written authorization of a parent or guardian to possess and self-administer topical non-aerosolized sunscreen while on school property or at a school-sponsored event or activity without being required to provide a medical provider's note or prescription or having to store sunscreen in a specific location. A school is to keep on file the parent's written authorization. In subsection B, a school may adopt policies to allow school personnel to assist a student in applying topical non-aerosolized sunscreen if written permission from the student's parent or guardian is obtained. In subsection 3, school personnel shall not be required to assist students in applying sunscreen and shall not be responsible for ensuring that sunscreen is applied to the student. In D, school and school personnel are immune from civil liability for actions taken in good faith reliance on the provisions of this section. And this section would not apply to reckless or intentional misconduct on the part of school or school personnel. And then in subsection E, we have a definition of sunscreen. It means a product regulated by the FDA for over-the-counter use for the purpose of limiting ultraviolet light-induced skin damage. That is it.
Could we hear from the school nurse? Just wondering if there's
Yeah, we're setting some testimony.
Right.
So why don't we hear from the Department of Health, and then we're gonna have to have a little bit of testimony from the school. We'll figure suggestions on that.
okay.
So Elsa Stolberg is here, so why don't you, welcome, it's nice to have you here. From the Department of Health, why don't you introduce yourself for the record, and we'll listen to your thoughts.
Great, thank you so much. Again, I'm Elisa Stolberg. I'm the Director for Family and Child Health at the Vermont Department of Health. I'm glad to talk to you today about sunscreen in schools. I'm sure I don't need to share some of these statistics with you, but I will anyway. So as you all know, cancer is a leading cause of death nationwide and specifically in Vermont. And Vermont has significantly higher rates of melanoma compared to other US states, and is actually on par with Australia, which has the highest incidence of melanoma around the world. We know from some data that we collect through the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey that 3/4 of high school students have reported that they had a sunburn in the last year. So, and we know the direct connection between sunscreen and preventing sun damage and potential skin cancer in the future. Currently, because sunscreen is regulated by the FDA, it's a over-the-counter medication, and therefore requires both parent permission and the sunscreen needs to be stored in the nurse's office and administered in that context. And what this bill proposes to do is to allow students to bring in sunscreen, keep it on in their backpacks or in their locker, and then be able to put on the sunscreen sort of as needed throughout the day. It's an important strategy in preventing against skin damage, skin cancer, and also helps minimize the burden of sort of the storage and the application of sunscreen in the nurse's office. And there are a number of other states who have already done this, and there's pretty substantial strategies already in place to get both parent permission and to sort of support this in the school building. So I think that's all I have to share for now, but I'm happy to answer questions as you might have them.
So thank you for that information, and please do send us your comments electronically so we have them for reference. It'd be terrific. So you mentioned melanoma and protecting kids for that. Are there other illnesses that you know about that where kids are helped because they use sunscreen? I'm thinking of lupus, for example.
I actually don't know the answer to that question, but we are happy to talk with our team back at the health department and get the answers to that.
That would be great. That would be terrific. Thank you. Questions? Senator Weeks.
Thank you, ma'am. So this is the first time we've looked at this bill.
Yeah, it is.
So my questions can be rather generic. As always, I'm looking for what problem are we trying to solve? I understand sunburn, sunscreen, et cetera, but what's the current state in the schools that
Requires it.
right, that,
Yeah.
convinces us that this bill is necessary to enact?
Do you have a comment on that?
Sure. So what I can tell you is that this and I we'd be happy to connect you with a school nurse to talk on this topic. This actually came from them because I think there's a pretty significant burden on the school nurse and the school health office to be able to store sunscreen, and also to have kids have to come in there throughout the day to put on the sunscreen. And so this helps promote the use of sunscreen without the added burden on the school health office.
So please do send us a contact information for a school nurse so we can hear from someone there.
So what legislation created the obligation for the nurse to store the sunscreen as opposed to the student? What are we trying to
It's
solve?
federal law,
Federal
because
law?
it's
Okay.
FDA, I think that Elisa said that in her testimony, it's
Yes.
FDA regulated, so.
I get that, but I didn't know that meant that the nurse had to store. it.
Yeah, it's like ibuprofen or Tylenol, and at the
Yeah.
beginning of the year, that sent home lots of forms saying, do you allow your student to have these things, and parents have to sign, so this would probably just add it to that list of the things that parents have to give permission to for or not. And because it's regulated by the FDA, it has to be stored in nurses, so this would say, don't have to.
Okay, and then again, the state versus the federal requirements. Our state creating this legislation.
This is a good question to ask
Okay.
of Ledge Council and then also of any of the school personnel that we have coming in. And we have Brendan Atwood. Here you are again, thank you.
Happy to be here. Again, for the record, Brendan Atwood, Policy Director at the Department of Health. So I just want to clarify that as far as our research indicates, there's no prohibition per se on students being able to carry sunscreen in schools. However, nurses are required to observe the standards that are promulgated by the Agency of Education, which, as Elisa mentioned, treat sunscreen like other over-the-counter medications. And so the reality is that, as Elisa mentioned, these are required to be stored and administered by the nurse, which creates a barrier. In many cases, students may determine not to bring in the sunscreen because of that barrier. And so from our perspective and that of the school nurses and the Agency of Education, in fact, as well, we see that this is a very simple solution to reduce a significant barrier to the protection against melanoma. So what this will do, just to clarify a little bit more, is it gives kind of express permission and actually a requirement that students be allowed to carry this rather than the default, which is currently essentially that students cannot carry this and self-administer this. And of course, allowing them to do so will increase the chances that they use it and apply it.
This is a good introduction, so we will hear from school personnel to get the thinking that's going on out in the school world, and we may run it by the education committee. Go ahead.
I agree with Senator Deal, we should hear from the School Nurses Association, their president is awesome, she's one of the school nurses in my district. And also the NEA, because the one concern I have with this is the little kids having a big tube of stuff in their backpack, and making a mess because they're trying to apply sunscreen in their kindergartners or third grade, little kids, gets in their eyes, they, whatever. So I'd like to hear, what teacher, because the teachers ultimately were the ones that have to deal with that mess.
We're at the first stage here,
Yeah.
so if you have someone, the school nurse in your district, let Kiki know, and Elisa, you're gonna send us the name of a school nurse affiliated with your work. We'll get others from,
I think NEA should.
yeah, I know that. We'll get others to come in and testify. And I may testify to this from a personal perspective, so we'll see how it goes. All right. Any other comments that you would like to make on this bill?
Not at this point, but again, happy to answer any questions and provide any other assistance that we can to the committee as they consider this bill.
Okay, so yes, we'll do that. We'll go through, we'll have some testimony, and then we'll make some decisions. So thank you for that. We don't really have sufficient time to go back to S-197 and Brenda, I hope you'll understand our time pressures, but we do have you to be invited for next week on that bill, and I know the Department of Health has comments on various sections, so thank you for understanding our world.
Absolutely, certainly understand. Thank you for inviting us back next week.
All right, thank you all. So we've gotten started on 187 and we've made huge progress on 192, which is terrific. And 197, I think we're gonna start to make progress on next week. We're gonna go offline and call it a wrap.